6 Northern Terrafly runway heading runway 5. Clear for takeoff.
From Psychic Sundays to ET Contact and everything in between, this is Spaced Out Sunday's Cosmic Passport with host Elizabeth Anglin.
Check it. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That'd be great. So guys, smoke now.
You can connect with Elizabeth on Skype at 505-908-9558 and Spirit for Peace. Follow Liz on Twitter at Elizabeth Anglin and hashtag SpacedOutRadio. And you can connect with us on the web at spacedoutradio.com.
I feel the need for speed. You feel it over and over again. We take you higher and higher and higher. You feel it over and over again.
Chillers, we're now. Smoke off now.
This is the love we live again.
Chillers, we need more than Contact. Easing up. Chillers, we're now. We're now. One left.
Don't look much like Los Angeles to me. I knew I should have taken that left turn at Albuquerque.
Now taking you on a spiritual journey from the desert of New Mexico this Sunday night, here's Spaced Out Sunday's Cosmic Passport with Elizabeth Anglin.
Chillers, ready to get Contact. Chillers, turn now. Smoke on now. Chillers, ready to get Coming now. Chillers, turn now.
Good evening and welcome to Spaced Out Radio's Cosmic Passport. I am your host, Elizabeth Anglin, coming to you from this Spaced Out Radio Cosmic Cruise Mobile. We are coming to you live from the stormy, windy, wild, and wonderful desert Southwest, specifically the Art Colony Hippie Commune. Yes, it's a commune of Madrid, New Mexico. Okay, it's not really a commune, but it's the closest thing to it in this day and age. So, and the hippies are still here. We are so glad that you're here this Sunday on Spaced Out Radio. We thank you for coming in to listen to us yet again. And all of you who are listening in from North America and the world, I want to welcome especially everyone at WQEE 99 Rock the Key in Noonan, Georgia, at spacedoutradio.com on Spreaker, on the United Public Radio Network, Renegade Talk Radio, and KTOK, thefringe.fm. That's right, that's thefringe.fm. I also want to give thanks to guitar god Ron Bumblefoot THAL, formerly of Guns N' Roses, currently of Art of Anarchy, for creating the music that makes Spaced Out Radio Weekend Rock, the official spacedoutradio.com music. Hey, if you're on Twitter, check us out at Spaced Out Radio, or give our Facebook page a like at Spaced Out Radio. On Facebook, you can follow me at Cosmic Passport with Elizabeth Anglin, or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio. It's really hard to remember Spaced Out Radio, but just in case you forgot, it's Spaced Out Radio for all of those things except for Cosmic Passport with Elizabeth Anglin. Tune us in on TuneIn, download our shows from iTunes. We are also on RadioGuide.fm, TalkStream Live, and on Stitcher, and of course our website is spacedoutradio.com. If you go to patreon.com, we have some cool offers for you, our listeners there as well. Make sure you check those out. If you want to take part in the show tonight, we will be taking questions with Dr. Todd Pressman, who is an expert on spiritual emergencies, also on A Course in Miracles, also on a bunch of other cool stuff. So do sign in to the chat room on Spreaker if you haven't already, or the chat room on Facebook at the SOR Space Travelers Club. Also, please check out our news section. We've got some super cool videos from UFO seekers and the amazing Tim Doyle. And you can check out Dave Scott's latest blog there as well. So, if you are an experiencer and you've had an experience of some type that you can't explain, please fill out an SOR Sightlines report. We have researchers ready to help you find out what's going on. Again, big thanks to everyone listening in from around the world. We are so happy you're here on this February 18th, 2018. It is 2/18/2018. It's a synchronistic, well, what is it? Is it synchronistic, Dr. Pressman? It's repetitive. It's repetitive if it's not synchronistic. I am here with Dr. Todd Pressman, who you're like, well, who is this guy? And, why is he on Spaced Out Radio? I think it's because he's very brave and he's not afraid of, the terribly hard questions I'm about to ask him. One of the things that makes me think he's brave is that he's done a lot of work. He's an international presenter, psychologist, and author. He's the founder and director of Logos Wellness Center and Pressman Associates Life Counseling Center. And he is helping people design lives of meaning, purpose, and fulfillment. He has studied under some of the world's leaders in the consciousness movement, and he also got some help from his father, one of whose teacher was Sigmund Freud. And I can't talk. That must be a Freudian something or other. I don't know. He has traveled all around the world to study in the great wisdom traditions. He spent time with a Zen master in one of the monasteries of Kyoto. He had exchanges with a Zoroastrian high priest outside a fire temple in Mumbai. And he has witnessed authentic fire walking and other fakir ceremonies in the jungles of Sri Lanka and Bali. And he has also stayed with a Jain family whose reverence for life had them put out sugar each night to feed the ants. So, if I did that, my cat would eat the ants. And it would be sad, but she would eat the ants. But she would be alive. Anyway, his experiences provided a cross-cultural perspective of extraordinary capacities of the mind and spirit, and this is a perspective that informs and enriches Dr. Pressman's work to this day. I was interested in him because he has done a lot of work in spiritual emergencies, and I want to get into that. But first, Dr. Pressman, thank you so much for being here. We're so happy to have you. What do you have to say for yourself being such a seeker? How did that happen?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and it is a pleasure. My story isn't particularly unusual, I would say. I, like all good adolescents worth their salt, at age 12 or so, started asking the big question: why are we here? What's the purpose of life? And who am I really? Sensing that there was definitely something more than the nice, happy, contained bubble I had grown up in. And all of a sudden, I'm seeing a sort of existential void and wanting to figure that out a little bit. So I began a pretty intense philosophical search, which quickly turned into a spiritual search when I overheard my father, who was also on his own spiritual journey, saying things like everything is consciousness and all is one. And I didn't really know what that meant, but it sounded right somehow at 12 years old. And I began my own reading, and then quickly found the Castaneda books and fell in love with those, ate them up as quickly as I could. Eventually landed on A Course in Miracles as one of my most influential paths in teaching still to this day, as well as Zen Buddhism, and pretty much anything that I could find that I thought spoke to me about a piece of truth or a broad picture of truth, and trying to integrate that with my work as a psychologist once I embarked on a path of psychology in graduate school and psychotherapy as a clinician and so forth. So, as I say, not that unusual a path, but I guess what's unusual about maybe the intensity with which I pursued it and still pursue it to this day.
Well, that makes. I have a question. What did your father do that he was so into consciousness or oneness that he would tell you these things? What was his job or
Well,
his
he
background?
was, as you hinted, he was a Freudian psychoanalyst in the very early days of psychoanalysis. It had just come to America when he was in medical school, and at that time he told me that the only treatment they had for schizophrenics, for instance, were hot and cold baths. They really didn't have any appreciation for what was going on at the deeper levels of mind, let alone the spirit. Then along came some of the early drugs, and they did help relieve symptoms, but they weren't understanding the spirit, that's for sure. And then ECT or shock therapy, again, relieving lots of painful symptoms, but there really wasn't an appreciation of the larger dimensions of the unconscious first, which Freud, of course, introduced us to, and then of spirituality, which slowly but surely made its way over to the West from the East, as we all know, in the 60s. And really, his orientation evolved with the times because he was inherently a seeker himself and was very open-minded. He actually wanted to be what they called a training analyst, which was a psychoanalyst that could train others, and that meant you really had arrived in the field. You were like at the center of the center. But they didn't accept him because they felt like he was just a little bit too much of a raw nerve. He was a little bit too much on the edge and the fringe of things. So that turned out to be a blessing because it opened him up to certain adventures when he was invited out to the Esalen Institute by Michael Murphy, which was, really getting launched back in the 60s also. Mm-hmm. And met some pretty neat people like Stan Groff, who I trained with, and his own spiritual journey opened up from there. And as I said, we kind of nurtured each other's paths. As he was reading certain things, I was asking questions. We would have conversations, and we grew together. It was quite wonderful.
And so, Michael Murphy, in some ways, he's one of the founders of transpersonal psychology, isn't he? Wasn't he at the very beginning of that?
Sure, yeah.
And so what's interesting to me is you're talking about treatments for schizophrenics, and, at first they had hot and cold baths, and then they had drugs. They didn't think about the spiritual ramifications, which there's a split that happens there where you have somebody like Stan Groff, who did a lot of work with drugs, with LSD, but he did a lot of testing with other drugs and is now gone sort of away from that. But he did come to an understanding that there are spiritual ramifications in these kinds of illnesses, even though, his early years were doing drug testing. Do you happen to know any of the history more than what I've just said about that?
Perhaps a bit, and I think it's important to distinguish between the drugs that suppress symptoms and the kind of drugs Stan was interested in working with, which are, of course, the psychedelics that expand consciousness. Mm-hmm. So those are very different activities in the brain or in consciousness, I would say. But what I know about Stan's story is that he was a Czech psychoanalyst who came over to the States again in the early 60s when they invited him to the Maryland Psychiatric Research Institute because he was one of the very first people to get permission to use LSD for psychotherapy. And this was, LSD had just been discovered by Albert Hofmann, and there wasn't all this bad PR about it, which came later when, of course, it had gotten mixed with impurities and people were taking it in less than responsible ways and having some bad trips. So the press got a hold of that, and we all know the story from there. But before that, it was really quite a remarkable tool for, again, expanding consciousness, healing all kinds of psychological injuries. And he even did some work with terminal cancer patients. I saw the videos that he had taken, and these people were ordinary people who were facing death and extremely depressed about it until they had this remarkable consciousness-raising experience, and suddenly they're completely peaceful about their death, certain of what's on the other side, and nothing like what most of us usually think of when it's time to approach our own mortality. So it held terrific promise. Of course, when the press got hold of the horrors of LSD, as they like to call it, Stan's license to practice LSD psychotherapy was taken away. But that's where we can talk about his present technique called holotropic breathwork, which I know you're familiar with. Mm-hmm. Real briefly, he discovered that, or he noticed that people coming out of the LSD experience would spontaneously start to hyperventilate. And he found that this was a kind of natural mechanism of the body and mind that would extend and enhance their LSD experience. So when he couldn't use the LSD, he said, let me try just the breathing. And lo and behold, it worked. And people reported very much the same kinds of experiences as with the hallucinogenic, but purely in a natural way without the drug at all. And he had combined this work with some important music therapy by Helen Bonney of the Institute for Consciousness and Music, music that's specially selected to help enhance the experience, as well as some bioenergetic work and mandala drawing, the work of Joan Kellogg, and so forth. And that's the work that he does to this day, and is the replacement for what he was doing with the LSD psychotherapy.
And so this is really solidly in the realm of transpersonal consciousness or transpersonal psychology, what we're talking about with Stan Grof, versus the more traditional, okay, you're seeing things other people don't see, you're having some schizoaffective things, or we believe you're psychotic. And the way that they treat that is by suppressing. And now you've done a lot of work with spiritual emergencies, and wouldn't you say that the spiritual emergency work is really about exploring versus suppressing, going into versus running away from? Say you're paranoid, or you feel like you've got a demonic voice talking to you, and rather than running away from it, going bad, 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 evil, you go, okay, let's look at you. What are you? Would that be correct to say?
Absolutely, and it's actually, I think, a really profound point. I've got all kinds of things I want to try and respond to in that. So yes, Stan Grof also was the founder of the spiritual emergency movement. And when I trained with him in 1983, his spiritual emergency network was just getting started. He wanted to create a network of psychologists and psychiatrists and other healers who were open to the idea that what might look like psychotic symptoms to one person would be understood as a spiritual awakening to another. In fact, he was a very talented cartoonist, and he drew a cartoon of a mystic with a long flowing white beard hanging upside down from a tree, as a mystic is supposed to do, I suppose. And then a person in a straitjacket talking to him. And the person in the straitjacket said to the mystic, "Why do they call you a mystic and me a psychotic?" And the mystic said, "Well, I know whom not to talk to." So Stan, was differentiating between psychosis and spiritual emergency or spiritual awakening, and creating this very important network, which exists to this day. Last I heard, it was taken over by JFK University, but I might be outdated on that. Mm-hmm. In any case, one of the things you said that I wanted to respond to is it is still important to recognize that there is such a thing as a psychotic experience or a schizophrenic experience, which is not always a spiritual emergency. And it's a matter of, are the thoughts organized and coherent? Are Are they coming from a worldview that makes sense and all the parts fit together, even if it's not the usual worldview? Or is there a kind of disintegrated reality that doesn't make sense? And that's where you get like the persecutory voices of schizophrenia and so forth. Because I think the ultimate thing I wanted to say in response to your good question is that anything, and I believe this with such conviction, that has a spiritual tone or point or purpose to it is going to ultimately be for our growth toward, we can say love, we can say oneness, we can say wholeness, we can say God. And even though it can be definitely challenging at times, as long as there's that overarching orientation, then we know we're in good hands and we know that the journey is going to have a positive outcome. Again, if it's a psychotic experience, that's not the case, and we do have to help contain the person's experience so that they don't feel more anxious, scared, and terrified by a reality that doesn't make sense and doesn't move toward oneness.
Right. We have a somewhat difficult time in our sort of little corner of paranormal peer group support that I want to talk to you in regards to that. It's where we find people who have applied, and what's interesting about especially what I've been through is that we will have the same percentage of actual alien abductees will also be psychotic. Like if it's 2% or 1.5%, I can't remember what it is of the general population. 2% or 1.5% of actual abductees will also be psychotic. And so, and it's sometimes very hard because you'll find somebody coming out with the narrative that you understand, and then they'll go into gobbledygook. And it's like, okay, do you actually have this narrative? Did you apply this narrative because you were looking for some place to live? And of course I have no clinical training whatsoever. I'm just a peer mentor. So it's like, right. I'm wondering what you would say to this, that if you're dealing with people who are actually dealing with some sort of paranormal reality and you're used to that and you get good outcomes from what you do. We have a lot of people on the list. Forest Moon Paranormal helps people with this. I do alien abduction stuff. What do you do when you find the person who is right on that edge? You refer them on? I mean, it becomes very difficult. And do you have this problem in your practice, where you think it may be a spiritual emergency and then it goes blah, 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 blah. What do you do?
I would say I've definitely seen spiritual emergencies in my practice, and the person undergoing the spiritual emergency didn't know whether they were going crazy or not. Boy, even Freud thought he was going crazy because he had no map. He was the one creating the map, and at one point, as he's exploring his own unconscious, he said, what is this? Is this madness to piece apart and tear down all of my defenses to figure out who I really am? And it's not who I thought, and it's not what anybody else is thinking, and so forth. So my answer to you on how to treat it or how to respond to it as a therapist or as a compassionate human being who wants to help is really from A Course in Miracles. And that is that whenever there's fear, and you referred to this, we have to know and trust with all the faith that we can muster that fear is ultimately an illusion. That doesn't mean that we pretend it's not there. Usually and often we have to work it through. We have to take it seriously. We have to provide a safe environment to do that work. But we know that the fear piece of any experience has to give way in the end to this higher understanding of again, love and oneness. And as we do that, the, quote, psychotic experiences will fall away because in my understanding, they're only expressions of fear. People only become psychotic, schizophrenic, and so forth because of fear that's not resolved or understood or known how to work with. And yes, people will say it's biologically based. I don't buy it. I think our spirit determines our biology. So if we work through the fear, no matter what the issue, in a smart and responsible way, that means you can't ignore it, you can't pretend, you can't do a spiritual bypass and say everything is lovey-dovey. You have to work it through with lots of guts and courage sometimes. But in the end, once it's worked through, the psychotic elements disappear or transform into a sensible, higher understanding of reality. And yes, I love to work with that when I'm given the opportunity. It doesn't come up so much in my practice as a therapist, but more in the holotropic breathwork experiences we were talking about, and so forth.
So I'm just going to ask you a quick question from Dale in the SOR Space Travelers chat room. We haven't really covered this. He says, what is a spiritual emergency? A crisis of faith, an existential crisis? Can you give him a better definition than either of those
I was thinking
things? Yeah.
We do need to cover that. The term spiritual emergency was chosen by Groff because he wanted to capture both the emergent nature, like a spiritual emerging, as well as the emergency nature of it, because it can feel like a crisis if it's not understood and handled properly. So that's what the words actually mean. But I think your chatter is correct in saying that it can be an existential crisis, if that's understood in the spiritual sense, or any kind of paranormal experience or non-ordinary experience that we struggle with. Lee Sanella wrote a book a long time ago called Kundalini, Psychosis or Awakening, and that was one of the first treatises in the field to distinguish between spiritual awakening that had an emergency aspect to it versus, again, the psychotic or disorganized experience of schizophrenia. So the best answer I can give is that anytime we're having a non-ordinary experience that's difficult or challenging and often fraught with fear, of course, it's a spiritual emergency calling for us to work through that fear. And again, once we work through the fear, things can settle beautifully into place. Stan Groff's wife, Christina, who's no longer with us in the flesh, sort of took over the spiritual emergency part of his work because she had her own very powerful spiritual emergencies. And it's no secret, she struggled with alcoholism that she understood later was her attempt to address her spiritual needs. And once she worked through that spiritual emergency, the addiction component dissolved, and she opened up to some extraordinary and wonderful experiences. You can look up her drawings that she did, which were very beautiful, to illustrate her experience or her journey in that way.
We have called people who are abductees. Some people are contactees. We've had a wonderful guest named Eileen Meyer who had a Kundalini experience along with messages from alien beings. And her life went from a state of disorder to actually a greater state of order afterwards. She integrated all of this. So I'm not saying that everybody who's an experiencer is an abductee, but I am going to talk about abductees here because it's very common that there's our addictions or multiple addictions with people who have had alien abduction. And part of it is there's a great deal of fear, but there's no reason for it. Like, you don't remember what's happened in most cases, and you get put back, and you've had a traumatizing event, and you're fearful, and you don't know why you're fearful. And the alcohol numbs or it lessens that fear to a significant extent. But we also have, food issues. We can have heroin issues, any other sort of drug issues. And I know so many people who thought that they would go under regression for their alien abductions back in their 20s, didn't do it, ended up becoming, alcoholics to the extent that they had basically killed themselves or were about to kill themselves, and then went under regression and stopped drinking. Like they didn't need to go to AA forever and ever. They went into regression. They went back to the event, and there was no need to drink. Do you ever find that when people face their fears, in general, across the board, no matter what it is, that they're not having that need for drink or something else?
Drink or something else, or any of the negative symptoms associated with spiritual emergency. Yeah, that's the point precisely. I think that once we understand that the fear is an illusion, that's Course in Miracles language, that the fear is a misinterpretation of higher truth, then the negative symptoms disappear no matter what they are, what category they fall in. So, yeah, I think that's a very good illustration of it. And I would say that someone who goes through regression isn't just remembering, they're integrating. And in the integration, they're healing the fear. That's where the positive outcome comes. Yeah.
Yeah. And we've heard from people on the list who are doing work with abductees who say, oh, I wouldn't suggest getting a regression. Lots of terrible things can happen. My experience was that it freed up a lot of energy for me to go forward with my life. I didn't get over my fear right away because, I was afraid I was going to get killed accidentally. But once I got over that, there was a lot more understanding, a lot more integration. And I just wanted to make that statement to people who are listening. You'll hear people on here saying, oh, no, don't get regressed. I would say, do it. Look at what's happened to you. Find out. Because it's a way of knowing who you are and what you've been through, and also how strong you are. If you get the right therapist, they will bring you out of it saying, see, you survived that. How strong are you? Right?
But if I can make a quick comment, this is coming from my experience working with people who've had serious trauma. I mean, major trauma. Well, being an abductee would be a trauma, of course, as well, if you're not understanding what's going on. But even, quote unquote, ordinary experiences of trauma. And it's important to take a person at their level of readiness so that you don't flood them with too much of an exposure to their fear. That can cause them to clam up more or, get deeper into their fear where it's just harder to reach them and resolve the fear. So we have to take ourselves at the level of our readiness and approach the fear bit by bit as we're able, and again, with that very safe kind of trusting environment that makes the healing possible in the first place.
That's a good point. Very good point. Okay, so, well, we've been talking a lot about fear, not very much about how you got where you are right now, but let's backtrack. So you went all over the world this was before you became a psychologist. You went on a trip, right? In college.
Yes. A wonderful experience called Semester at Sea, if anybody's heard of it, where you take your classes on a ship with 500 other students and travel literally around the world. I also had my strong bent toward spiritual things at that point already, so I took as many religious studies and anthropology courses as I could, which meant when we were in port in different countries, I was able to study the religions of those countries, and that's where I had some pretty marvelous experiences, as you mentioned at the beginning, with a Zoroastrian high priest and a Zen master in Kyoto, and some fakirs in the jungles of Sri Lanka who were walking on hot coals, and in Bali where they, I have a photograph of this. I call it my National Geographic photograph. I was 5 feet away from two gentlemen in Bali who were in a profound trance. It was obvious, and their bodies were kind of quivering. Their eyes were rolled up into their skull, and there was drumming going on and incense in the air, while they, and I'll tell your listeners to prepare their stomachs for this, they had thick metal hooks being dug into their backs. This was their offering of flesh, as the Native Americans would call it, switching cultures, but their sacrifice to their deities. And attached to the hooks were ropes that were pulled taut while the fakir would swing in a circle with somebody holding the rope at the center. But there was no blood. I watched these hooks being dug into their backs. No blood at all. No evidence of pain. They were just in another reality, and they marched joyfully down the street to their temple where they were going to finish their ceremony. So yeah, I had experiences like that, which certainly opened my eyes to the powers of non-ordinary reality, and how what our minds tell us is possible is rather limited, as we all know on this radio show.
That's amazing. So fire walking, did you take part, or did you just watch the fire walkers?
At that time, I just watched. I have done a couple of fire walks myself when it became popular in America, but this was a sacred experience. I loved my fire walks when I took workshops, but this was in the jungles again, by a young man who was the son of a firewalker, and he himself was the son of a firewalker. In other words, it went back generations, and they trained their whole lives from a secret book that they weren't allowed to share with anyone, and it was not the same thing as a Tony Robbins workshop, which I'm not knocking, but this was quite a powerful ritual. He again, there were drums to create the trance, and he did this wild trance dance, which was very exciting to watch. He had what he called devil's teeth in his mouth, and they were just big, fanciful-looking teeth that protruded out from his lips. And the idea was that he was embracing his fear, which I think is another important concept we can talk about in terms of healing fear, so that he wasn't afraid of, quote, the devil. He was, or of the fire. He was embodying the power of it and turning it into something very positive. And then he, after he had done this trance dance, took a giant leap into the fire pit. So people who say that fire walking is just a matter of tiptoeing quickly across the coals so that the perspiration on your feet protects you, not so. This guy landed solidly in the fire pit and stood there without moving for several seconds. And then he continued with his trance dance in the pit and literally scooped up burning coals and poured them over himself, which is all the more remarkable. I have photos of this as well. All the more remarkable because his outfit was made of dried grass, and it did not catch on fire. So it was a beautiful and very holy experience, and he proudly, I was just so excited. I went right up to him afterwards and started talking and communicating the best we could. His English was very limited, and I had no Tamil to my background to be able to talk in his language. But he proudly showed me the bottom of his feet, which weren't burned, and then threw a piece of meat onto the coals, which instantly sizzled to prove just how hot it was. That was my fire walking experience in Sri Lanka.
That's amazing. So he was entranced. Had he incorporated was this part of himself, this part of his high self or higher self or divine self, or did he look at this as being a being that had incorporated within him that was impervious to fire, or some combination of both? Or did you get a chance to talk about that at all?
No, I wish I had. Those are wonderful questions. Again, his English was really limited, but the only thing I can speak to, if it's relevant or helpful to the listeners, is my own experience. I'm sure many of the people listening have also done fire walks. My own experience doing a fire walk or two, and it was wonderful. I did my own self-fashioned trance dance at the beginning, and there were drums going that helped. And we were all in a big circle around the fire pit, and my heart's racing with excitement. We watched the leader go across the coals, and I think that shifted something in our psyche to know that this was possible, and now we were open to that reality. And at a certain point, I felt a very distinctive hand, a non-physical hand, push me gently but firmly in the middle of my back when I knew it was time to leave the circle and go to the front of the pit and walk across the coals. And I'm standing there right in front of the pit, about to walk, when I feel my heart chakra open up spontaneously, very powerfully, and this huge beam of energy pour out from my heart chakra that seemed to move in a bubble or a toroid, if you know what I mean. It moved above my head and around my body and under my feet and created this energy bubble around me. And that's what my experience was of what protected my feet. There was literally an energy bubble under my feet as I walked across the coals. So I can't answer what the gentleman's experience was in Sri Lanka, but that was my experience.
That's wonderful. I mean, that I've never heard somebody talk about their experience that way before, but it makes very good sense to me that if you are in love, or if you are open, or you have this energy of love about you, love is one of the most protective energies in the universe. So you would be very, very protected and well. Wow. Very, very cool. All right, so the monastery, the Zen monastery dude, we're going to call him that. What did he have for you?
Well, his name was Sensei Koretsune. I had a wonderful religious studies professor on the ship, the semester at sea program, who himself was an avid spiritual seeker. And that's why we were fortunate enough to meet some of these great people. He had been a student of this sensei when he lived in Japan, as well as a student of the Dastur, which is what you call a Zoroastrian priest. And the Zen monastery, this was the famous monastery in Kyoto that many people have seen pictures of, especially the rock garden. So when you think of a Zen rock garden, you're probably thinking of the picture you've seen of this place. It was quite beautiful. I mean, it was exquisitely beautiful. We were sitting there meditating on the rock garden and instructed by the sensei to notice that the way the rocks were positioned was such that you couldn't see all of them from any one angle, no matter where you stood. And that was to demonstrate that there's always a piece of reality hidden from our awareness. And then we watched the monk in his practice of raking the pebbles of the rock garden, which, of course, they do as a meditation on a daily basis over and over to make these very precise patterns of the pebbles. And that's their way of focusing their attention, of course, to empty their mind. At one point, the sensei gave me a piece of calligraphy, which I still have, is very beautiful, of the circle of emptiness, which is a common theme in Zen calligraphy. But this one had some characters inside, which he translated as, "I only know satisfaction." And the message was, as we empty ourselves and dissolve the ego into the oneness, that loss of self, which we, as egos, usually think of as a very scary or terrible thing. It's like death actually opens us up into perfect fulfillment. So those are some of my experiences there.
Wonderful. And very different than, I hear the way a lot of Americans view Buddhist tradition is that, well, you're finding nothingness. And I've always thought, no, you're realizing your connection with everything. And it sounds like what they gave you, it was not about nothingness. You weren't dissolving into nothingness. You were dissolving into your connection with everything. Is that how you took it? Absolutely, yeah. If I translate in A Course in Miracles language, which I think is very Buddhist, I would say the small s self dissolves to be replaced by the capital S self, which is the self that is the one mind of all of us. So it is complete and perfect and whole in every way, and is not separate from God or any aspect of the oneness. So there's just one of us, as we know, from lots of spiritual teachings, and one mind, and the capital S self that the Course in Miracles talks about represents that. And I think that's exactly what this circle of Zen calligraphy was demonstrating as well. Beautiful. Some of us are currently in a spirit mediumship class, which I'm facilitating with Marcellus Eyre, who's in spirit. And in the spiritualist training, which is long before Zen got to the U.S., there's a belief in you go through all these different levels, and finally you're at the monad, which is the one. It's like you have all of these levels of individuation, and then you're at the monad, which is the one. And I find to me, that's always, this is a Christian spiritual faith in that it came out of, North America. But studying some Buddhism before I became a spiritualist, I was like, yeah, right on. It's all about the one. Eventually you are at that level where you're at the one, which is lovely and beautiful. Okay, who else did you talk to who was really cool on these travels? We've got about 5 more minutes. You can tell us another story. If I may, I'll change the question a little bit and tell you a story, not of my own experience, that answers something you just spoke to, because I think it's just such a great teaching point and such a wonderful story. Would that be all right? That would be great. Well, some of your listeners may know of the book called Mutant Message Down Under, which is a true story by Marla Morgan. I saw her present, and unfortunately she got it published. She self-published it first, and then she got a big fancy publisher, I forget which one, that insisted they call it fiction, but she went along with it grudgingly because it was the only way they could publish it. They would publish it so she could reach more people. But it was a true story of her, I would say, friendly abduction by Australian Aborigines. And this group, I forget how many there were, about 60 or 70 perhaps, Aborigines took her on a walkabout through the outback of Australia. Now, she was a Westerner who had no prior experience or preparation, and that kind of journey would kill normal people. But these Aborigines, of course, were well prepared for it, and they took good care of her. And the adventures are so remarkable. I strongly encourage your listeners to read this book. It's just marvelous. One of the adventures included a moment where all 60 or so of them were walking along in the outback. Of course, there's no distinguishing features in the landscape to tell you, obviously, where you are or where to go or how to direct yourself. It seemed that they were just wandering freely. But at a single moment, a precise moment,
without anybody saying a word. All 60 of them, however many, turned in the same direction like a flock of birds at the same exact moment. And they had done lots of other things that demonstrated how psychic they were. And so that evening when they were resting, she asked her guide, the one person who spoke English, how is this possible? And he said, we tell no lies and we have no secrets. Now, I was just struck with that idea because it instantly reminded me or awakened in me the understanding from A Course in Miracles, which says there are no private thoughts, that our minds are in fact one. And when we think we hold private thoughts, secrets that we can keep from each other, we're creating this illusion that we are separate minds contained in separate bodies. And that creates our suffering, right? That's where we're afraid. What if somebody knows my secret thoughts? I'll be so ashamed, or I'm so afraid of that, or I'll feel so guilty. All of our suffering comes from that. And this tribe of Aborigines had no secrets, told no lies, had no private thoughts. So they were literally manifesting the one mind. They knew each other's thoughts. And that's what came to me when you told your story.
And that's an amazing thing. And what's interesting is you're right. So many people are afraid that, or seeking ways to protect themselves from other people knowing what's going on with them. Because they basically, and given the level of consciousness in general, I can see that you should protect yourself from certain people who might have other intentions and desires. But when you get a whole community at the level where it's just about you're surviving together, you're protecting each other, you're taking care of each other, it would seem there's no problem with that. There's no problem with knowing each other's thoughts or knowing in a very intimate way that doesn't involve physicality, what's going on with the person next to you, or a person, 100 yards away, or a person on the other side of the universe or the world. That is amazing.
Sure.
You have a book. You have a book to give to people, and we have 1 minute left. Do you want to tell people about your book? 1 minute in the first hour.
Okay. It's called Radical Joy. Yes. That's different. Sorry, I did mention that to you. I have a published book called Radical Joy, Awakening Your Potential for True Fulfillment. And then I have a free ebook that I'd be happy to send anybody called Quotes and Stories That Can Change Your Life. It's just a compilation of favorite quotes and stories that I've gathered over the years that are teaching stories and really are very, very impactful and address a lot of what we've been talking about. So if anybody wants to get a copy of that, happy to send it for free. Just go to my website, which is toddpressman.com.
Okay. I'm going to go to that website and get that book. I didn't do it before. I didn't realize it was there. We have to go to break now. Otherwise, somebody will tell Dave and he'll get me. But we will be right back. And please get your questions together for Dr. Pressman after these messages. Guys in the chat rooms, he is open to answering questions.
Hey, space travelers, it's Joe Roop, your host of Spaced Out Saturdays. Come join me as we explore the realms of the paranormal, the esoteric, and everything in between every Saturday night at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern. You know the truth is out there. Don't get caught sleepwalking. Come join Spaced Out Saturdays. That's every Saturday night, 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, right here on spacedoutradio.com.
365 days a year, we're in the field, investigating UFO sightings, talking to alien abductees, and visiting secret military locations like Area 51. We're UFO Seekers, official partner of Spaced Out Radio. Follow our daily search for the truth at ufoseekers.com or like us on social media. Catch us on Spaced Out Radio every third Monday of the month as we discuss Area 51, UFOs, and more. And also, don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube.
From coast to coast to coast, Blacklight Uncharted is taking on the paranormal across Canada. From ghostly hauntings to the UFOs flying above in conjunction with MUFON Canada, they're closely investigating what's going on in the northern skies and checking out the apparitions that walk among us. Check out our videos right here at spacedoutradio.com. We want to know your thoughts, we want to hear your experiences, and we want you to share your stories. The answers are out there, and we intend to find them.
Would you like to become one of our space travelers? All you have to do is click on the Space Travelers icon at spacedoutradio.com. For only $5 a month, you can get access to some great prizes, as well as private monthly shows, newsletters, and a members-only section on our website. Become a space traveler today.
It's paranormal news at its finest. Welcome to The Encounter. At spaceoutradio.com, The Encounter online is SOR's trusted news source for everything weird and strange going on around the world. This is news editor Eric Markham. Our team of journalists are scouring the planet for those strange stories that rarely make the mainstream. No fear-mongering or fake news here. Head over to spaceoutradio.com and encounter The Encounter.
Want to learn more about aliens, cover-ups, conspiracies, cryptids, and the paranormal? All you have to do is tune in S4 as we take over the Spaced Out Radio night, starting at midnight Pacific, 3 a.m. Eastern, each and every Saturday night, right after Spaced Out Saturdays. Hi there, this is Eric Cooper from Forest Moon Paranormal. Join me, Corey Ruiz, and friends as we discuss the hot topics of the night. It's fun, entertaining, and as dark as the night. Find us at spacedoutradio.com.
Hey, this is Canadian Paranormal Investigator Mike Moore. The third Wednesday of every month, I'll be teaming up with Dave Scott to bring you Ghosts of the Great White North. Each month, we will bring on guests from across Canada to discuss their ghostly encounters. Canada is a paranormal hotbed with stories you've never heard, so we're going to bring them to you. So get comfy on your Chesterfield, grab a donut, and join us, eh?
There's a lot of strange going on in this world, and we can help you find out what's going on with you. Paranormal, cryptids, UFOs in the sky, aliens in your bedroom tickling your toes. We have the investigators you need to find out the answers you deserve. All you have to do is head to spacedoutradio.com. Your information is 100% confidential. The SOR Sightlines Report. It's free, and we're here to help.
Do you want to know what's really going on in your world? Do you have questions about who you can trust in the mainstream media? Then look no further than the Rebel Planet. Come get the straight answers right here at spacedoutradio.com. Join me, Jamie Sexton, creator of Rebel Planet News, as I fill you in on the stories behind the stories. All you truth seekers, be sure to tune in to Rebel Planet on spacedoutradio.com the third Thursday of every month.
Are you an experiencer? Have you had run-ins with strange creatures you can't explain? ETs, Dogman, Bigfoot, werewolves? They're enough to scare the daylights out of anyone. Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski from your 4-Cop. And on the last Monday of every month, you can listen to me and the host, Dave Scott, talk about the weird and the strange being reported on Spaced Out Radio. I'm going to bring my investigations and sources, you bring your experiences, and we'll figure out the rest together. Strange Days on Spaced Out Radio. Come tune us in at spacedoutradio.com.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you'd like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
Don't have time to listen to Spaced Out Radio live? Wherever you are, the car, the office, the shower, or even if you're traveling, we're right here for you. Each Spaced Out Radio show can be found on iTunes, TuneIn, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. It's the perfect way for you to catch up on our shows. For more information, just head over to our website, spacedoutradio.com, and tune in to us today.
Looking for nighttime adventure? Old school radio that delves into everything out of the norm? Then check us out at Spaced Out Radio. This is Dave Scott. Every Monday through Friday, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, we're going to take you on a wild ride ranging from conspiracies to true crime and every ghost, alien, and Sasquatch story in between. We're always live and we're always interactive with you. So join us at spacedoutradio.com, where together we own the night.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guests and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. And hit us up on Twitter using the hashtag SpacedOutRadio. Now, back to Elizabeth Anglin and SOR.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to Spaced Out Radio's Cosmic Passport. I am your host, Elizabeth Anglin, and I am coming to you live from Madrid, New Mexico. Thank you for listening, everyone around North America and the world. Everyone at WQEE 99 Rock the Key in Noonan, Georgia, at spacedoutradio.com, on Spreaker, on the United Public Radio Network, and KTLK, The Fringe.fm, and Renegade Talk Radio. Hey, thanks also to Ron Bumblefoot THAL, our music maker. He makes the music that makes Spaced Out Radio Weekend Rock, the official spacedoutradio.com music. If you are on Twitter, check us out at Spaced Out Radio. Give our Facebook page a like at Spaced Out Radio. On Facebook, you can follow me at Cosmic Passport with Elizabeth Anglin, or just follow me at Elizabeth Anglin. Subscribe. I have the cowboy hat on Facebook, if you're wondering which Elizabeth Anglin I am. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio. Tune us in on TuneIn, download our shows from iTunes. We're also on Radio Guide FM, TalkStream Live, and on Stitcher. And, of course, the website is spacedoutradio.com. We thank you so much for being here and taking part of this show. It is February 18th, 2018. I just love the fact that the dates line up so perfectly. It only does that once a year, you know. Now, we are going to get back into some interesting conversation with Dr. Todd Pressman about overcoming fear, which is the main work in his life. But we're going to go back and talk some more about the spiritual emergency work that Stan Groff does, mainly because I have a debt of gratitude to Stan Groff, and I've done some of this work. And the people who helped me significantly in my life as an alien abductee worked with Dr. Stan Groff, and were in some ways inspired by him to not run away from the phenomena, scary, ooh, bad aliens, to face their fears and to help myself, who was quite afraid when I woke up to my experiences, to face my fears and overcome them. So I am so grateful in so many ways that Dr. Pressman has decided to be on the show tonight to talk about overcoming fear, but also about one of my favorite people, Dr. Stan Groff. And everybody else who's on Spreaker, we will take questions. And if you have a question about, you know, your mind, body, spirit connection, healing yourself with your mind, anything else, hey, you know what I always like to use psychologists for is, this happened to me. Am I crazy? I don't know, Dr. Pressman. Do you have any inclination to do like validation or invalidation of people's experiences? If somebody writes in and says, "This happened to me," am I crazy? Would you be willing to answer?
I'm happy to answer any question. I'm not sure if I could give a yes or a no on a question like that. But I would listen and get some information first. Sure.
Okay. I have a good friend, Barb, who is a psychologist, and we went to music school together, and then we both found out we were abductees separately, and then re-met, and she later went on and became a psychologist. And so she's been the one that I always go to, "Hey, this is happening. Am I crazy?" And she'll be like, "No, you're just having this." "Oh," and she says, "That's fairly normal." I'm like, okay. Thanks, Barb. So it's always good if you're psychic or have paranormal experiences to have someone say, they'll ask you another set of questions. Is this happening? This happening? This happened? No. Okay, you're fine. It's like, okay, I'll continue on. I'll see you in 2 weeks when I have another question about my sanity. So you will soon have lots of paranormal friends because you came on the show. I'm just warning you what to watch out for. So Stan Groff, let's go talk about Stan now that I have beaten that horse with a stick. Stan Groff, I have my debt of gratitude to him is that someone invited John Mack, who was my helper through my abduction experiences, to go do holotropic breath work. And in the course of doing holotropic breath work, both with re-experiencing or feeling he re-experienced a child abduction by Mongols in Russia, somebody also brought up to him the fact that there were people who were being abducted by aliens, and these aliens were taking children, and he became interested in the subject. And it's kind of a, at one point the whole transpersonal consciousness movement was sort of stuck in my craw because I couldn't get away from people who were calling alien abduction research consciousness research, and they were like, "Woo, we're doing consciousness research and we're so cool," and I'd just be like, "Shut up, I'm having a terrible time." And the people who were having a wonderful time doing consciousness research were the ones who were not abductees, and the abductees were going, What is your experience of Stan Groff? I've met him since, and he's lovely, but at that time, people who followed him really made me crazy because they were like, "Yay, consciousness expansion." And I'm like, "Shut up. This sucks."
Let's see.
How is it for you?
I think you're saying, and I didn't know this, if this is what you are saying, that Stan and his followers were calling alien abductions just a consciousness experience?
Yes. People who were interested in that, they were calling it just a consciousness experience, and that this was about consciousness research. And I had police reports, and I had family members witness me being abducted. I had all sorts of physical things happening, and all the other stuff, the gynecological stuff, the missing babies, the whole trauma drama thing along with it. And and my helpers are these people going, "We consciousness studies." And I'm like,
yeah,
die.
Well, I certainly, Well, anytime somebody's experience is invalidated, it's not going to feel good, especially if it's an experience as extraordinarily powerful as that. I wasn't aware that they were calling it a consciousness experience, but I can't speak to that. I can say that perhaps they were coming from the philosophy that in the end, all of manifest reality is somehow an experience of consciousness, but that's not very helpful when you're going through something very seemingly real and concrete.
Yeah.
So
and then you're getting told, "How come you don't have a better attitude about this?" You're like going, and this was not John. This was not John Mack doing this. This was his assistant and friends. It was like, "How come you don't have a better attitude? How come you aren't more hopeful?" Now
here's something I can say as I think about it. A Course in Miracles talks a lot about the illusion of the world, that it's an illusion. And sometimes that can throw people off and even get them a little bit into trouble because it's tempting to say, well, if it's an illusion, it's not there, and I don't have to worry about it. But I heard a translation that made all the sense in the world, and I'm quite sure now this is what the Course in Miracles means because I see it verified all over the place. And the translation is that it's not that there's an illusion of truth that like it doesn't exist. It's a misinterpretation or a distortion, a perceptual distortion about what's really going on. So that's where the principle of fear becomes so important, fear versus love. When we're in fear, fear distorts our perception. And when we resolve the fear, we can see the same situation, but clearly. So or objectively, you might say. It's not, my view would be that it's not that alien abductions are only a consciousness experience, or that anything of the quote unquote physical world is only a manifestation of consciousness. It's a question of whether we're understanding it clearly or through a lens darkly, as they say. There's a pretty interesting example where someone perceived a ghost that it's I'm going to change the example. Same kind of a thing. In the Castaneda books, Don Juan, the Yaqui sorcerer, the shaman, was teaching Carlos how to transform his perception and see alternate realities. And he does whatever he does to create kind of an altered state. And Carlos is looking off at a mountain in the distance, and he sees this bizarre shadow creeping across the mountain like some kind of an alien being. And Carlos is like trying to understand what is going on. How can this being from another dimension be appearing on this mountain? And suddenly, because Carlos was fighting it internally, his perception, quote, shifted, and he saw that, in fact, Don Juan was holding up a piece of fabric that looked like a shadow on the mountain, but was actually very close to him. And Don Juan was very upset with him for ruining the experience. But I think it illustrates your point perfectly. Don Juan may have been using a piece of fabric, but in fact, he was opening Carlos up to another reality, or trying to open him up, that was very real and very important, and not to be denied and dismissed as just a piece of fabric.
Right.
Right.
Well, and what I liked about what you were saying is I actually pulled a quote out because of the bicycle book that you wrote, which I do want you to tell people about, the multiple personality disorder book. But you said it was in the epilogue. And what's so interesting is that I went to the dump on Saturday. And I got rid of all my recycling, and as I'm driving back from the dump, I'm thinking, my main problem is that I'm hopeful. I keep being hopeful, and the things I hope for keep not happening. And I've really got to do something about this problem of being hopeful. And the quote that I pulled out that you had written is, the fundamental problem with being human is this: we go into battle with reality when it conflicts with the way we wish things to be. We dissociate ourselves from what we would require too drastic a change in our identity, and insist that the situation conform to our wishes. This is the cause of all relationship struggles, holy wars, political rebellions, and environmental problems. Our human nature would have us attempt to force the world, especially other people, to change so that we do not have to. Of course, the world does not comply. And integration and healing are matters of recognizing this fact. The comas, we realize that life is not to be lived in the endless pursuit of satisfying our wishes and avoiding our fears, insisting that the world meet our needs. And it was so funny because I was like, hey, I was thinking this on Saturday. My problem is I get hopeful, and then the world does not represent what my hopes are. But this also goes back to the alien abduction information, in that I actually started to heal from my fear of that when I stopped making it be about me. When I stopped saying, me, I, suffering. This is all about me and my suffering, and this is really crappy. And all of a sudden, everything went went to total and complete pot, and I woke up one morning and I said, the problem I'm having is I'm making this too much about me. I'm going to go out and listen to somebody else's story. I'm just going to go sit and be with people and see what's going on with them, because all of this me, I is really making me suffer. What do you think about this? Is it that we get hopeful, and is it that we make it about us when we get hopeful? Or we just make it about us too much?
Well, it's a really powerful question. What comes to mind is a dictum from the Zen tradition that says we need great faith, great doubt, and great determination. So great faith and great determination are like hope, right? Mm-hmm. But it has tempered with great doubt, where we can't afford to get too comfortable with our certainty of things, so that we stop questioning and challenging ourselves, because then, of course, we can settle into kind of rigidified and limiting belief systems and so forth. So of course, I hear the way you're using hope, and it's interesting. It's a very interesting way of using it. The other way of using hope is that it is the motivator to keep on keeping on when things get tough. Mm-hmm. But in general, I think your point is that, whenever there's too much insistence on I and too much focus on me and what I want, we get into trouble. And it's not about self-denial, because that's just a different form of focusing on me, right? I'm going to deny myself so that I can get what I want. It's kind of a not too subtle disguise for the same thing. But to really practice dissolving the fear-based need. It's always about fear, in my understanding, when we're struggling with something. To dissolve the fear-based need to get things to be the way we want. And then to say, let me practice some acceptance, some surrender to the way things are. And lo and behold, we get a whole lot more of what we want, don't we? But sometimes it means just being peaceful with the way things are, instead of getting what we want in the form that we thought we had it. Yeah. So it's the peace and the resolution that's important, not the form.
So, yes, I agree with that. Now, the guy in the Spreaker chat room is asking or saying, asking in the form of a statement, fear is the byproduct of holding on to a perception of reality, no?
Yes.
Okay, he says yes.
More. I think that's very well said.
And then he has an add-on, and he says, at inception, it's fear. I think he means fear. It's still love with context. No? So fear is still love with a context, is what he's asking.
I think I understand. It's creatively written, so I appreciate that part, and I'm pretty sure I understand what he's saying. And again, A Course in Miracles language is there are only two orders of reality, love and a call for love. So it translates any fear as a call for love. Absolutely. And the first part was intriguingly said also, that when we hold on to a view of reality, it's the holding on that belies the fear, right? Why do I need to hold on to this view? Why am I insisting on it? Because there's fear of seeing things a different way, or seeing things, or being willing to see things a different way, and perhaps see things as they truly are. I devised a nifty little tool, I think. It's actually pretty powerful, for making decisions. And that is to be willing to face the fear of all options, to completely face the fear of going this way in your decision, and completely be willing to face the fear of going that way. Because when you face the fear, and there's no more hidden need to hold on to, like, it's got to come out this way, I have to make this decision, I've got to see this reality, then we're in a neutral place to observe objectively and to say, this is what's going to serve the situation best, as opposed to this is what I need reality to look like. it's not going to work very well. We're going to be bumping our heads against the wall very often.
Okay, so Joseph in the Spreaker chat room has a question for you. He wonders if you have any specific recommendations for a Western person beginning the practice of Zazen, and can he describe the purpose of Zazen?
Oh, wow. I don't feel qualified because I'm a pretty serious Zen student myself, but I would not say that I'm a teacher in that respect. I'll give you my personal experience. That's the best I can do. Zazen is sitting Zen.
Yeah.
So it means you're sitting in meditation, and it's usually a practice of following the breath. And of course, lots of meditation traditions follow the breath. But sometimes Zen involves the koan tradition and so forth. Don't need to get into that necessarily, but to start as a Westerner, you follow the breath, you count the breath, lots of different ways to do that. The point is simply to to train your attention to focus on one thing, because of course the mind wants to wander, and that's, I can bring a little Course in Miracles perspective into that as well. When the mind wanders, it is also because of fear. I watched myself once doing a meditation many years ago, and every time my mind wandered, it was because I was going through a checklist of fears. Did I turn the stove off? Am I going to get to work on time? Am I dressed appropriately for this meeting I have to go to? All a checklist of fears. And fear, of course, is what caused the separation from the state of oneness in the first place. So it fractures our attention into many, many parts, many, many different directions. Or as they say in Buddhism, monkey mind, right? Our mind is like a drunken monkey stung by a bee. So when we allow our mind to wander and into many directions, then we have this fractured experience of reality, and we're not seeing the wholeness of it. And so Zazen is one way to train our attention onto one point, usually starting with the breath. And we get better and better at that over time, and some wonderful capacities open up. Zen is pretty strict about saying don't get caught in, it's very strict about saying don't get caught in any of the special experiences. It calls them mokkya, which means the stink of Zen. You don't want to believe in these, or you don't want to get interested in special psychic phenomena, so to speak, because it deters from the real goal, which is to completely empty the mind and have an awakening to the experience of no self, like we were saying before, the loss of the small s self and the awakening to the capital S self, which is the oneness. I think there might have been another part to that question that I didn't answer.
Well, I'll answer for Joseph. I did Korean Zen, and it's known as grandmother Zen because they're really, really nice, and they don't hit you with sticks, whack you with sticks when you sit to wake you up. Some people like that. I would not have liked that. And they do a lot of chanting of the Heart Sutra, and I have had, when I first started sitting, I had very good experiences with Koreans and the people there. Now, it depends on your community, I suppose, but Song Snim was he had been their teacher. He had passed just recently when I started sitting, which was in the early 90s. Yeah, if you want people to whack you with sticks, do Japanese. If you want not to be whacked with sticks, do Korean. So...
And I did get whacked with sticks, but it's actually a gesture of compassion because they hit you at a certain pressure point on the trapezius where there's a lot of tension that gets built up when you're sitting for a long time. So you have to ask for it with a palms together gesture, and they do it as an act of compassion. It does look rather brutal, but it's a loving act.
And yeah, in that case, then I would suggest either one, because I can tell you that the abbot at the Korean Zen Center helped me out quite specifically with a lot of questions I had and things that I was going through at the time. So, find a group that is well established and go for it. It's a lovely, lovely thing. We had another question, a follow-up question from Craig, or the guy. Sorry, Craig, the guy. Do you think we hold on to our perceptions of reality because we don't feel whole within? So we hold on to the external in order to feel whole?
I'm just reviewing the question in my mind. We hold on to our perceptions of reality because we don't feel whole within. Absolutely. And that's well said. Could you repeat the second half?
So we hold on to the external in order to feel whole. What? To our perception of the external. What?
Yeah, we hold on to the external to have an illusion of being whole. But of course, that's the problem, because the external can't give wholeness. It's always changing. And there's an important Buddhist principle, right? Impermanence. We hold on to the external. We try to arrange our environment or get control over things to be just the way we want. And then they go and change on us, right? There isn't anything that doesn't change. Ultimately, our physical experience changes when we die. So it definitely is a byproduct or a result of fear and a sense of our inherent insecurity, or what Karen Horney, the famous psychologist, called basic anxiety. Like existentially, we're anxious. We know that this is not our home. We know that we can't hold on to anything and have control over it in a permanent way that will make us safe. And only by working through that most fundamental fear can we find, as we're talking about with the Zen tradition or Course in Miracles, a wholeness that is invulnerable to the external changing circumstances of the world. Great question.
Yes, great question. And I'm just going to add in a wonderful indictment in the positive way for Zen, Course in Miracles, and any form of overcoming fear for people who are working in the paranormal. Because, things that go booga, booga, booga want to scare you, right? And if you're really not able to become afraid, then you're able to deal with it. So, yeah, they're in the chat room. They're talking about some ghost spirit that did not want to be moved on to the other side, who went booga, booga, booga. Basically, he's going booga, 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 looking for somebody to take over because he's got no body, because he doesn't, he's confused and he hasn't moved on, or whatever the heck the reason is. Okay. I want to go back to Stan Groff again. Let's see. Now, I heard some incredible things when I went in 2010 to do holotropic breath work. I heard and saw some incredible things. I had done a lot of regression before I went, so my experiences were rather pleasant. I wasn't totally shaken up coming out of the 2 sessions that I did. I did a short, 3-day workshop thing. And I really had a wonderful time. And it cleared up some issues of the moment that I was having, and some others. But what did you learn? I mean, what can you tell us about how he goes about sort of adding spirituality to psychological wholeness, or just to wholeness in general?
Well, that's a big question. Stan is considered really the father of transpersonal psychology now. So your question is, how does transpersonal psychology do that? Let me answer in 2 ways. One is by describing his model for healing and growth, and 2 would be by giving some examples that come from holotropic breathwork experiences. Stan devised this model as a result of studying people's experiences, and he says that there are 4 layers of the psyche. First is biographical. That means, our history of stuff that's happened to us in this life. The second level the first is actually sensory. So we can have all these sensory experiences in the breath work that are good sources of artistic inspiration. They don't have a lot of meaning beyond that in Stan's model. The second level is the biographical or the historical. The third level is what he calls the perinatal level, meaning experiences that come up in the breath work or any other kind of paranormal situation that have to do with the birth. And people often experience or re-experience their birth in the breath work, and it can give tremendous insight into all kinds of psychological goings-ons in our lives. In fact, Stan divides the perinatal level into 4 sub-levels, the 4 different stages of birth, which are worth mentioning. The first stage is before labor, where the fetus is in the womb and all of his or her needs are met, and it's an experience of bliss. There's no separation from the oneness yet, and we don't even know our physical boundaries because we're just floating in the amniotic fluid, and nothing tells us where our edges start and the outside world ends, or vice versa. So that's an experience of cosmic oneness and bliss. Then labor begins, and the walls of the uterus start to contract. And for the fetus or infant in utero, this is an extremely painful experience where he or she is experiencing total helplessness and no possibility of escaping from it. Stan says that these different stages become templates, you might say, for later life experiences. And when we're having an experience later in life of helplessness or of no exit, and he says that's where he believes Jean-Paul Sartre's book No Exit comes from, this second stage of the birth experience, then we are reliving that stage and experiencing the psychological trauma of it. The third stage is where we start to move through the birth canal, and all of a sudden there's a light at the end of the tunnel. We're not just helpless. We're not just the victim of oppressing forces that we can't do anything about. We're actually moving toward a goal and using our will for the first time to do so. Later life experiences, pattern on top of this when, again, we're moving toward a goal and we're using our own power to do so. And the fourth stage is where we're outside of the womb, hopefully in a state of peace and contentment, but this time with the new knowledge that there's danger out there, there's fear, and there's the potential for real suffering and struggle that we have to be on the lookout for from then on. Lots to say about that, but the fourth stage, those are the 4 subdivisions of the third stage, the perinatal stage. The fourth stage is the transpersonal stage, and in the breathwork, people have remarkable transpersonal experiences that cover the entire range of non-ordinary or paranormal experience, whether it's past life, whether it's cosmic consciousness, whether it's experiencing out-of-body states, and so forth. And I said I would also answer the question by talking about some of the experiences that people can have. I've gone through it myself hundreds of times. I've led these workshops. I continue to lead them over couple of decades now, so it's hard to pull out 1 or 2 experiences, but here's an interesting one that I think will illustrate the healing potential. And before I tell the story, it's important to understand part of Stan's model is that one of these 4 levels can pattern on top of another. He calls them coex systems of condensed experience. So we can have a psychological experience in life that actually comes from more than one level of these stages of birth. And here's a really good illustration. A man, and it was one of Stan's patients. A man went to Stan because he had this mysterious shoulder pain in his left shoulder. He went through the holotropic breath work and re-experienced a time when he was very young and fell off a skateboard onto that left shoulder. He wasn't allowed to cry, so all of that trauma got stored in the muscle around his shoulder. Going through the breath work, he was encouraged to cry and cathart and get the experience out to resolve it and finish what was unfinished from all those years ago, and the shoulder pain disappeared. But it came back, which was Stan's indication that there was another level of experience to work through. So he took him through the breath work again, and in fact, he went back to his birth. And he remembered being caught coming out of the birth canal with his shoulder at that point, the same painful point, not able to get through the opening of the womb. And there was a whole lot of pain, and again, a whole lot of trauma that was stored in the muscle. In the breath work, he catharted, he expressed, he got it out, and the shoulder pain disappeared. But it came back one more time. Stan took him through the breath work again, and this time he went back to a past life. And he remembered himself being in a war during the time of Cromwell, and he got lanced through that shoulder at that precise point. As he relived it and he experienced it and expressed all the feelings associated with it, the shoulder pain disappeared and never came back. So there's the answer to your question. How's that?
That is amazing. And when I was having holotropic breath work, the girl next to me was going through the birth process. Not being able to function, to deal with that. So it's very interesting because there is this sort of, people do sort of pair up in what they go through if you're in a big group as well. But there were a lot of people getting rebirthed at the same time when I was there. But doesn't it go deeper also into, there were some people that were screaming like they were possessed or undergoing exorcisms, or doesn't it get a little deeper than that? Yeah, I guess my example, I like it because it demonstrates the different levels, but it doesn't give a sense of the incredible psychological and spiritual impact of this tool. It can go extremely deep. You're absolutely right. And the entire range of human experience and spiritual experience is possible with this technique. It's important to say that you can't go in with any expectation, well, I'm going to have this experience, or it's going to be painful, or it's going to be joyful. Anything is possible, and Stan says there's a sort of inner knower that chooses what issue needs to come up most, or issues in the breath work for the highest kind of healing and growth possible, and you just can't predict and don't want to predict what that will be, so that you're open to whatever needs to happen. But yeah, people often go straight to a kind of cosmic consciousness and ultimate bliss without any trauma. So others have to go into painful experiences in the interest of resolving them. I worked with a guy who had been electrocuted with 18,000 volts of electricity that went from his feet all the way up the back of his body to the top of his head and down the front, and stopped just short of his heart, where if it had reached his heart, it would have killed him. And he had to re-experience that in the breath work. It was painful to watch because he was writhing in agony. But
I was sitting with him and working with him very, very closely. And I trust this process. There's no question that it's always in the interest of healing. He kept saying in the midst of his screaming, this is good, it's good, I'm touching the pain, I'm finally touching the pain that I've been holding inside. And he ended up with this absolute beatific glow on his face and a peace in his body that he hadn't felt in all this time since the accident. He had been walking with a severe limp and a cane. He got up from breath work and had no limp. It was quite extraordinary. So that's an example of some of the power of it for physical healing. But, people can definitely heal emotional traumas of any sort. And again, not just from this life or not just from this dimension, but the whole gamut of experience is possible. It's quite a wonderful tool.
Yeah, very, very good. I'm trying to, my stuff was sort of mundane. I had some issues with a client never showing up on time. And one of the things, and I can't, make anybody think that they'll have this experience, but I had a past life experience where we had 2 lifetimes back to back where we were family members. And she had I was this teacher at this monastery, and she was a family member, and we had a sibling who had epilepsy, and we weren't able to heal the sibling of her epilepsy. She fell off the back of a cart and had a brain injury and then became epileptic and eventually died from it. And so she was holding against me this fact that I was this big, high, mucky-muck monastery person, and we had this sibling who I couldn't save. And then in the next lifetime, she became the big, high, mucky-muck monastery abbot, and I was the sibling who was very poor, and she would never give any money to. So I went to the temple and I raided it and threw the things into the rice paddies. And it was like, oh, well, there's some karma there. And it was the most interesting thing, because after I went through the experience, I said to her, we have some past life karma, and I just want to apologize to you for not being able to save our sibling, as long as you'll apologize to me for throwing the things from the temple into the rice paddy. And she said, sure, fine. And I said, great. She never missed another appointment. And it was like, it was like, I was wondering why it was being so hard to, I would keep having to work really hard to get you to make your appointment. And she's like, oh yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay. Never was late again.
Huh?
Yeah. And it was like resentment gone,
Right.
But it seemed very mundane, but she really had been a pain in my butt for like 6 months. And I'm like, what is going on here with this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, not to say, but people do have past life. Like, given Course in Miracles and given this, what is your opinion about past lives or future lives or between lifetimes?
Well, I'll tell you the Course in Miracles position, and then I'll give you my answer.
Okay.
The Course in Miracles is very deft about answering that question, because it says it's not going to answer it. Like one of your chat room people asked earlier, if you get fixed on a position, it can work against you. So it says, the Course in Miracles says, the only question is whether it's a helpful concept. Now, having said that, it's clear in lots of ways that the Course says, of course we have past lives, and many lives, and but that's tricky too, because it says, well, if the world's an illusion and everything is really a manifestation of consciousness, we were never really born in the first place, so we've had no lives. But we're having an experience of many lives. And I think that actually somebody in the breath work that I took through once had an experience of being in between incarnations and remembering, choosing what lesson she was going to learn in the next lifetime. That was very interesting. So I think, yeah, absolutely. We have many lives. There's no question about it. And our job is to ultimately get off the wheel of death and rebirth, as the Hindus would say, by resolving all karma or all fear that creates karma and all need, therefore, to manifest this illusion of bodies being born and suffering and going through all the lessons that we go through. So ultimately the goal is liberation.
Very cool. Very, very cool. What's your take on this? Is that your take? Ultimately the goal is liberation, or?
Oh yeah, I was speaking for me.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, and my language for it is the goal is to resolve all fear so that there's no more obstruction to love, perfect love and oneness, at which point we, like I was saying earlier, there's nothing to obstruct our view or distort our perception, and we're back home in that oneness with God. That's the goal. Yep.
And that's a lovely, lovely thought. In the spiritualist way of looking at it, we would, if we're working with people, we would identify, okay, this is a spirit in the astral, this is a spirit in the, seems to be in the mental plane, this spirit seems to be in the causal plane, this spirit seems to be in the Buddhic plane. But the idea would be that through all these levels back to the whole, there is a journey involved, and what we don't want to do is to judge the journey too tightly, like make the negative appearance of the journey too solid or significant. It just sort of is okay, there's your journey, there's your story. Does Course in Miracles, or do you speak more specifically to that in any way?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. This opens up the subtle layer of how to work with resolving fear as a path to enlightenment. And it's an important part of my own path that took me a long time to get to. I'm still working with it, but boy, it opened so much up once I saw this. And I actually got it from a conversation with someone at the Zen monastery that I practice at in upstate New York, where she used a simple phrase that hit me like a ton of bricks. She said, there's a subtle aggression from trying too hard to meditate, which is another way of saying what you just said. If we get rigid or judgmental about the negative aspects of our path, it's like, well, I shouldn't be negative. That's trying too hard. And when we try too hard, when we want enlightenment too much, we are inserting our fear-based ego again. It's a hidden fear that says, uh-oh, what if I don't get there? I got to make sure I get there. And it looks so holy and it looks so good. Like I'm really determined and I'm going to sacrifice. I'll do whatever I need to do to get enlightened. And nobody was more zealous than me in that way. But in order to, and by the way, it always kept my experience one step away, right? I'm going to get there. I'm going to work harder to achieve this next level or whatever it is. I was never in the present moment with it. So when I relaxed and I said, let me face the fear of not getting to that next step, of not even getting enlightened, then all of a sudden I saw the fear that was blocking the experience of oneness in the present moment. So, I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with the concept that we're here, right? Enlightenment is here and now. There's nowhere to get. Whereas the Course in Miracles says enlightenment is but a recognition, not a change at all. So we recognize that when we're without fear, and we're not using fear to try too hard to get rid of fear, everything as it is perfectly acceptable. And when it's perfectly acceptable, there's nothing to disturb our peace. And when there's nothing to disturb our peace, we're home.
Oh, very, very interesting. And somewhat different than the paranormal world. We've just been having another chat going on here about a very bad spirit that's been trying to take over people. And it's like, well, that's a lot of fear. We were talking in chat about something that's quite fearful. And what we're also talking about here, between you and I, is something that seems antithetical to that. How do we deal with what seems paradoxical or antithetical?
Another great question. That is a tough one, because it's the question of how to be human and spiritual, or in the world but not of it at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that it's so important, as we were saying at the beginning, not to deny our experience that the world or certain bad spirits, if that's what people in the chat room are talking about, are real to us now, and we have to work with them as such, because otherwise you're burying your head in the sand and you're not going to be effective in dealing with it at all. Right. But at the same time, it's vital, I believe, that we remember in the end, love, which erases fear or shows fear to have been an illusion, is what takes care of all these problems. And we can't just sometimes, we don't feel safe enough yet or free enough to let go of our fear to just say, I'm going to jump into the highest level where only love is real. So we have to work through it at the level that we're ready. And as a psychologist, I do that with people in my practice every day. Your fear seems very real, very powerful. Let's deal with it in as practical a way as possible. And that's always a matter of facing it bit by bit as you're ready, because each time you face a fear, without fail, and this is really good news as far as I'm concerned, every time you face a fear, it dissolves. That means either you find there was nothing scary at all, or there's a problem that can be managed, that you can deal with. Fear creates a sort of hypnosis that says, oh my gosh, this is going to be completely ruinous forever. And we forget to look past that wall that fear throws up in front of our eyes and hypnotizes us with. We forget to look on the other side of the wall, which shows this too shall pass, always. And if there's a problem, then we deal with it in the moment. And it's not a cause for fear if it's something that we can deal with. Fear, again, it lies to us and it says that I'm completely helpless and will be destroyed by this. And when it passes and we survive it, even if that means surviving death, right, so that we lose our death, then there's nothing to scare us anymore and only love remains. So now if we're talking about a very specific practical problem like a bad spirit, then we have to deal with it in practical ways as we're ready, knowing at the same time that love is what heals. And, people put white light around them. Well, that's just another version of the same thing. It's a way of visualizing or perhaps energetically creating the experience of love that says, this is what prevails in the end. Yes, I can be scared right now, and I can be dealing with something on the level of form, which ultimately comes from fear. But in the end, the love will transform it.
Wonderful. We were talking with Dr. Todd Pressman. His website is toddpressman.com. We're going to be back right after these messages with more and questions from the chat room as you guys have them. Hang on.
Hi there, this is Dave Scott from Spaced Out Radio, and I want you to come on a nightly journey. Starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, every Monday through Friday, you can come hang out with me and the other space travelers. We have it all from Carl the Alien bouncing on by to those misfit gnomes causing havoc. It's 3 hours of fun and entertainment on those topics the mainstream really doesn't want to touch. Come get all paranormal with us at spacedoutradio.com, and together, my friends, along with our resident guitar god Bumblefoot, we own the night.
There's stories, then there's the truth. Do any of us really trust the news anymore? This is Jamie Sexton, owner of Rebel Planet News. The third Thursday of every month, I appear on spacedoutradio.com to bring you the truth you deserve, without mainstream media lies or alternative media fear-mongering. We'll get to the heart of the story and deliver the truth you're seeking. So come join us here for the Rebel Planet at spacedoutradio.com.
Not ready for bed on Saturday night? Right after Spaced Out Saturdays, hop on over to S4 with Corey Ruiz and me, Eric Cooper from Forest Moon Paranormal. With S4, there are no limits to what we try and uncover. From government conspiracies to helping clean up the paranormal, no topic is safe on S4. We get to the heart of the matter, of the subjects you want to learn more about. So tune in on S4 starting at midnight Pacific, 3 a.m. Eastern, only on spacedoutradio.com.
Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with the U4 Cop. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries. So tune in at spacedoutradio.com to the final Monday of every month from Butch Witkowski's Strange Days.
This is Eric Markham, news editor for the Spaced Out Radio's The Encounter Online. We have put together a great team of writers and journalists from all over the world to bring you top-quality paranormal stories, from alien encounters to the latest conspiracies. You won't find any of that fake news here. True stories and top-notch reporting as we look to bring these experiences to the mainstream. The Encounter Online, only at spacedoutradio.com.
Do you want to know the truth? Do UFOs exist? Are aliens real? Are the governments hiding the biggest secret in history? We're UFO seekers, and we're on a hunt for the truth. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow along with us as we journey across the United States, visiting UFO hotspots and alien hotspots, trying to document the UFO phenomenon. Catch us on Spaced Out Radio every third Monday of the month as we discuss Area 51, UFOs, and more. And also, don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube.
There's a lot of strange going on in this world, and we can help you find out what's going on with you. Paranormal, cryptids, UFOs in the sky, aliens in your bedroom tickling your toes. We have the investigators you need to find out the answers you deserve. All you have to do is head to spacedoutradio.com. Your information is 100% confidential. The SOR Sightlines Report. It's free, and we're here to help.
Patrolling the Pacific Northwest, we are always on the lookout for the strange and unassuming stories that real people are experiencing. Hi, I'm Vincent Zunza from Pacific North Weird. Me and Alexandra Sullivan have teamed to bring to you those odd stories that never seem to make it into the mainstream. Stories so weird that will leave you scratching your head wondering, is this real? It's as real as it gets with Pacific North Weird. You can watch our videos right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Become more intimate and interactive with Spaced Out Radio. Join our Space Travelers Club with your new membership. For $5 a month, we'll provide you with special access to the website, monthly prize draws from books to psychic readings, along with monthly newsletter, private interviews, and more. Sign up today to be part of Spaced Out Radio's experience.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
Don't have time to listen to Spaced Out Radio Live? Wherever you are, the car, the office, the shower, or even if you're traveling, we're right here for you. Each Spaced Out Radio show can be found on iTunes, TuneIn, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. It's the perfect way for you to catch up on our shows. For more information, just head over to our website, spacedoutradio.com, and tune in to us today.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
We are lighting the void on Saturday nights on Spaced Out Radio. Hey, this is Joe Roop, and I'm hanging out in SOR headquarters every Saturday night, bringing you the latest news when it comes to the weird and strange. Bigfoot, occult, UFOs, ghosts, and everything in between, I got you covered. You can tune in to spacedoutradio.com starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time. Come travel into the void with us on Spaced Out Saturdays.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guests and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. And hit us up on Twitter using the hashtag SpacedOutRadio. Now, back to Elizabeth Anglin and SOR.
Hey folks, we're back with Cosmic Passport on Spaced Out Radio. I am your host, Elizabeth Anglin, coming to you from the Spaced Out Radio Cosmic Cruisemobile in Madrid, New Mexico. Yep, I'm too young to be a hippie, but I sure wish I was a hippie. And this is a hippie art colony, and I'm so glad I'm here. For all of you listening in from around North America and the world, I want to welcome you. Thank you for coming back. Everybody in Noonan, Georgia at WQEE 99 Rock the Key. Everybody at spacedoutradio.com, on Spreaker, on UPRN, and on KTLK, thefringe.fm. Also, I want to thank Ron Bumblefoot THAL, our guitar god, for making us some great music. We love you, Ron, and we hope you're well. Also, if you are on Twitter, check us out at Spaced Out Radio. Give our Facebook page a like at Spaced Out Radio. On Facebook, you can follow me at Cosmic Passport with Elizabeth Anglin, or just Elizabeth Anglin. I'm the one with the cowboy hat. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download our shows from iTunes. On YouTube, we are Spaced Out Radio. We are also on RadioGuide.fm, TalkStream Live, and on Stitcher. And, of course, our website is spacedoutradio.com. If you want to take part in tonight's show, you'll have to sign into one of our chat rooms on Spreaker or on the chat room on Facebook at the SOR Space Travelers Club. Please check out our news section. We've got some super cool videos from UFO seekers and the amazing Tim Doyle. And Dave Scott's latest blog is there, and we have some new news. So go to spacedoutradio.com and see what's up. We're getting new things all the time. If you've had an experience you can't explain, fill out an SOR Sightlines report. Our researchers are ready to help you find out what's going on. Big thanks to everyone listening. WQEE 99 Rock the Key, and UPRN, and KTLK, The Fringe, thefringe.fm. That's where you find those guys, thefringe.fm. Hey, Dave Scott will be back tomorrow night, and he'll be on Periscope, I'm sure, because, you know, he's funny like that. And at the end of the week, we will have the Paranormal Roundtable, like we do the last Friday of every month. So tune in during the week to Dave Scott's Spaced Out Radio show. He's always got something special for everyone. Joe Roop, the amazing Joe Roop, will be in on Saturday again. And I will be back with Cosmic Passport on Sunday with a wonderful astrologist and Ms. Paisley Town for Psychic Sunday. So don't miss next Sunday. We are going to do Psychic Sunday. We will be doing readings. And can't wait. It's always fun when we do that. Dr. Todd Pressman is back with us talking about fear, talking about overcoming fear, talking about how to overcome fear. Thank you for being with us. We were going to talk some more about spiritual emergencies. I missed some questions, though, and the Groff method, what Groff does with those, and how that works with A Course in Miracles. But Dale Ellison just has a comment about yoga, the Eightfold Path. So he's talking about the method of getting off the wheel of rebirth. He says the Eightfold Path of yoga is another method to get off the wheel, kind of a shortcut to Hindu nirvana. Unfortunately, you lose yourself in the process. What do you think of that statement? Because I have heard it said that, there are lots of paths to sort of side trips to nirvana. Like, they're not the real nirvana, they're the sort of nirvanas, or the nirvana over there versus the oneness. What do you think of Dale's statement? Okay. Yeah, trying too hard. I just have a question for you. What do you, and this is just, oh, thank you. Somebody just pointed out I had you muted. Okay, restate that about the oneness for Dale.
Oh, yeah. Sure. Pardon. Thank you. Hello, everyone. So I said his first point was that you lose yourself in the process of getting off the wheel of death and rebirth, and whereas that is our greatest fear, the fear of merging back into oneness and rejoining with God, it is ultimately what we want and the only way to be, happy, whole, and fulfilled. So let's hear losing ourselves. As far as getting sidetracked into false nirvanas, if that's a fair paraphrase, I said that the Zen tradition, I think, speaks very well to that, because it says that you can have all kinds of paranormal or spiritual experiences along the way to enlightenment or to getting off the wheel of death and rebirth. And you have to make sure you don't get caught in them. You want to just sort of acknowledge them and say, or actually, as we said earlier, they call that sting. And you really, which is a little bit of a judgment, isn't it? So you can get caught in the judgment too. But it's a way of saying that you don't want to get too fascinated with visionary experiences. You want to stay on course with the goal of emptying the mind of all ego, of all fear, until you get back into the oneness with no holds barred.
Very good. So I had one of those experiences when I was 20. One of the what is it, the sort of stinky experience, the realization experience, or the psychic experience. What was the name you gave it?
The Japanese word is mokia. They call it the stink of Zen. So it's a bit extreme, because I think those kinds of visionary experiences can actually be very helpful. But their point is, don't get so absorbed in them that you lose your path.
Okay. So when I was 20, I had I'll tell you a story now about, it could have been mokia, it could have just been a really good experience, but At Berklee College of Music, we had Stefan Schindler was our Oriental philosophy professor, and he had been a Zen monk for about 15, 16 years, and in Japan. He was an army brat, and he grew up in Japan. He ended up going to a monastery in Japan, and he ended up leaving. He just, it wasn't working for him, so he left, and he became a follower of Krishnamurti. And one of the meditations, he taught us some meditation, but one of the meditations that we had to do as a class exercise was to walk around and notice everything. We had to be very specific about what we were noticing, like what shape are the leaves on that tree, what color is the bark, what sound does it make, how, as specific as we possibly could, make a mental note of everything. So I did this the first time, and it kind of wigged me out for some reason. I stopped, and then I went again, and I was in Boston. So I'm walking through downtown shopping district, financial district, Boston from Park Street, very busy. But everybody who I managed to get within eye line, I'm like, gray hair, pink coat, green shirt, jeans, and I'm like really, really looking at people. Well, what ended up happening is these people started following me. And because I had really looked at them, and there was something, I guess, about the way that I had looked at them. So it didn't matter. There was a young man, an older woman, an older guy, and a girl who looked like she didn't know what she was doing. And they all started following me. Like, they had been coming toward me, and then I looked behind me, and they were following me. And by the time I got done with the exercise, or I thought I was getting done with it, and I was walking back to Park Street, I just seemed like I was attracting everybody to me that was around me. And then I started seeing all these points of light in all of us. Like, there was this big light in me, and there were all these little lines of light connecting everybody who was in the train station. And for some reason, having done this meditation, my light was really, really big, and I just felt like everybody was coming toward me. And I ended up, I wasn't scared. I was just like, oh, wow, we're all connected. Oh, wow, I'm really bright. Oh, wow, it looks like they're noticing this. Oh, wow, I think I'm going to wait until just before the door closes and hop on the train, because if they all try to get in this train, we're going to get squished. And I did that thing. But by the end of it, but the moment that I was hopping into the train, everything was light, and everybody was connected. And I was just like, okay, this is really weird. And that came about just through noticing everything as I walked and making a note of it. Was that stink, or was that an experience?
Like I say, I don't go to the extreme that they do, but that sounds absolutely beautiful and also helpful, right? So you held on to the medication. And it certainly enlivened me as I listened. Enlivened or inspired, I suppose. So it's absolutely beautiful. I love that story.
Yeah, it's a very simple meditation. Okay, and let's see. Craig is commenting. He says, that crazy girl told me the same story, but it was about dirtbags surrounding her, and then when she switched from fear to anger, they scattered. Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess that's so. Let's see. What else were we going to talk about next? Anybody else have a question in the Spreaker chat room or in the SOR chat room? Please go ahead and type it in all caps. And
if I might.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to elaborate on the model, I think, for resolving fear that I'm working with. I'm so excited about. And we've been talking about fear. Resolving fear is a spiritual practice or a spiritual path, because I think that fear is the single source of any problem we can have. Any ordinary earthly human problem or any spiritual problem. And to resolve fear and see it for the illusion that it ultimately is the path to freedom. So if I can spend a moment or a few moments talking about the model for how I think fear is best resolved, I would really like to share that with the listeners. Understanding that we're born in this lifetime, most of us, pretty much whole, complete, happy, and fulfilled. And that at some point early in childhood, we meet fear for the first time. Mom leaves the room. We don't know that it's not forever, so we think we're, abandoned and we're going to die because we can't survive without her. And whatever the experience is, we have a contact with fear that makes a huge imprint on the mind of a brand new baby that's very impressionable. And it's so impactful that we have to find a way to get back to our previous state of peace and happiness. And we then develop what I call the chief defense, a strategy for how to protect ourselves from that fear. So if mom leaves the room, we might scream bloody murder. And lo and behold, she comes running back. So it works. And that makes a huge imprint on the developing psyche. So we have our first exposure to fear, an interpretation of what's scary about the world. I call it the core fear. And our first strategy for protecting ourselves from that core fear, which we call the chief defense. The core fear and the chief defense become our personality. These are the two ingredients that absolutely create our personality. Every situation from then on, we're going to look at through the lens of the core fear. We're going to say, hey, is this situation going to threaten me with my core fear? Is this person going to abandon me like my mother did? Or is it going to remind me of that in some way? Or is my well-being at stake because they're leaving in some form or another? And if so, I'm ready with my chief defense. I know what to do. Now, we're not going to scream bloody murder like as an infant. It becomes more sophisticated as we grow. But it's always based on that original idea of this is what to do to make myself safe. And our personality is defined as the way we interpret and respond to all of our circumstances along the lines of the core fear and the chief defense. So why am I saying all this? Because understanding that means we want to find out what our core fear and chief defense are so that we can unravel that and get back to that original state of wholeness and innocence we once knew. There's a very wonderful technique that's really fast and very reliable for finding out what your core fear is, and then another way to understand what your chief defense is. And I want to share it with people. To find your core fear, you can start with a problem, any problem, because remember, this is how we look at all of life. So every problem has the core fear at its root. And you state that problem in a short single sentence. Then you ask one of three questions to that problem. These questions are all different forms of the question, what is the fear underneath that problem? So maybe the problem is, my boss is upset with me. And then you ask one of these three questions, whichever one is most helpful. Why is that upsetting to me? That's the first form of it. What am I afraid would happen next? That's the second form. And what am I afraid I would miss or lose? Again, all three are different forms of the question, what's the fear underneath that first problem? So if the problem is my boss is upset with me, and I ask, what am I afraid will happen next? Then we get an answer that's one level closer to the core fear. We're going down level by level closer to the core fear. And the answer to what am I afraid might happen next could be, I'll lose my job. Now you ask one of the three questions to that problem. if I lose my job, why is that upsetting to me? And the answer brings us one level closer to the core. It might be something like, I won't be able to pay my bills. Then you ask one of the three questions. If I can't pay my bills, what am I afraid I'll miss or lose? I could lose my house. I could lose my reputation. I could lose my family. Ask one of the three questions again. If I lose those things, what am I afraid will happen next? My life won't have any meaning. And now we're down to a core fear. There are 5 core fears, universal themes of loss that we all buy into. And some of them you can anticipate. One is the fear of abandonment or loss of love. Another is the loss of identity, like who am I? If I'm not this person, who am I? If this circumstance happens and it takes away my identity, I'm in terrible fear because I don't know who I am. Next is the loss of meaning, like I don't have any meaning if I'm not, let's say, the father to my children or the husband to my wife or whatever it might be. These are the things that give my life meaning, and without them, I'm at a core, fundamental layer of fear. The next one is loss of purpose. Purpose and meaning are very similar, but purpose is about expressing yourself. What did you come to the planet to do? And if we lose our chance to express ourselves, again, core fear. And the last one is the fear of death, including the fear of pain and sickness that can lead to death. So the loss of life. All of us buy into one of these as our primary core fear, and it's the thing we're thinking about in the back of our mind anytime we're not really at peace and whole and joyful. It's always there. And at the same time, we're always ready to respond with a defense. So we're in a constant posture of defensiveness, ready to be confronted with fear if we're not in total joy.
Okay.
How do we find chief defense?
Yes.
We say, what is the first thing I did when I met my core fear to try and protect myself? Sometimes we can't remember that, but it doesn't matter because we're constantly rehearsing the core fear today. So ask yourself, what do I do today whenever I'm confronted with a fear or a challenge or a threat to my well-being? What's the big picture, the umbrella answer for how I handle, the strategy I use to handle challenges? And another way to think of it is, what can I imagine myself doing? What might somebody else do that is just not me? Because that'll tell you what is characteristic of you, what does define your personality.
Well, I know what I do. Okay, I have a question for you then. Sure. I go to sleep.
Okay.
And I just checked it. I went back. I said, well, I know my core fear because I remembered this was that my mom wanted to kill me. You know, the whole birth experience was, oh my gosh, this lady's trying to kill me. And then she actually did try to kill me a couple times later. But I get really sleepy and I go to bed. And this is also an alien thing. And Eric Markham, who is in the chat room, can attest to this. In the presence of alien tech, because we went by Mount Shasta and there was an alien thing going on there, I was having the darndest time staying awake. I had to go to sleep. And he got angry and I wanted to go to sleep. So what do you do? Okay, so I have this, I want to go to sleep. What do I do?
Okay, you're asking me, right?
Yep, I'm asking you. What do I do?
Great. Yeah. If, in fact, that's your chief defense, and I was saying that it's a little hard to, in the span of a few minutes, lay out the entire model, so there are more sophisticated ways to really pinpoint your chief defense and your core fear to know and see clearly. These are the things that have been shaping your entire life and making decisions for you out of awareness, usually, in ways that don't work well. But the key to healing, once you understand your chief defense, which again is the thing that protects us from the core fear, and remember, we've been saying all evening long, we have to face our fear to discover that it's an illusion, doesn't have the power we thought it did. At best, it's something we can handle, and even better than that, we might discover it wasn't real in the first place. So we have to face our fear, and the way to face our fear is to take away the defense. Not all at once, not foolishly, but as we're ready, bit by bit, remove or do the opposite of the defense. So if your defense is to go to sleep, which might be a way of protecting yourself by saying, I'm not going to deal with this. I'm not going to look at this. It's just too threatening. Then bit by bit, we have to stay awake or aware of the threat and look at it, move into it slowly, safely, and carefully. And there are lots of ways, or actually 3 major ways in this model for facing our fear that I found are extremely effective and extremely reliable. We don't have time to go into them now, but they have some fun names. The Alchemist, which is a matter of continually asking what happens next, like you're looking at a movie of your fear unfold until it gets to the other side and you see that it's gone, it's passed. You're free. It didn't have the power to do what it threatened to do. The next one is called The Witness, and it's kind of an enhanced mindfulness exercise where you look exactly at the moment of resistance. You say, here's where I'm exercising my defense. Here's where I'm not willing to look. And you pull it back. You become very finely tuned to the sensations of your defensiveness that protect you from your fear. And instead of using that resistance, you pull back on it gently but slowly and surely. And the third is called the warrior stance, where you do the opposite of your defense by actively moving into your fear. It's what we call in psychology exposure therapy, but there are ways to do it that are very fast, very reliable when we're ready to use them. So the principle for healing, once you understand your core fear and chief defense, is do the opposite of your chief defense as you're ready. There are 3 ways to do the opposite. One is go right into it instead of run away. 2 is stand there without moving, because what happens? You're telling yourself the fear, the power to make me run. And 3 is do something completely unrelated that brings you fulfillment and joy. Because again, you're telling yourself the fear doesn't even have the power to capture your attention. You are free to choose where you put your attention, and you choose not to put it on the fear. So that's the basic model. It's extremely effective. I'm doing some research now that shows better than 90% of the time, people get resolved of their fear in a single session with one of these techniques. And the best statistics out there for anxiety-based therapies otherwise are running about 45% success. So I'm very excited about this model, and I did want to take a few moments to share it with everybody.
Okay, so I've got something I'm afraid of in my life right now. Actually, several things, because I'm a normal human being. But I fell off my horse, and I fractured my L3, like a compression burst fracture, went and it is basically gone, and came a hair width away from being in a wheelchair for life. And I rode my horse a bit after that. This was a very big ex-racer, and I rode him for a bit, and then I had another experience where he dumped me again, and my back was hurt in a different way, and it wasn't as serious. But I haven't been up on a horse since that time, and I have a new horse now who's very sweet and very short and half warm blood, so she's very, she's not at all as reactive and as big in her motions as my big 17-hand Kentucky-bred ex-stakes winner. But I have gotten to the point where I've stopped riding her. I've stopped riding, so I'm not riding her. I've actually found myself not wanting to go see her. And I will end up staying in bed on the days when I plan to go in the morning and go see her at the boarding stable. And I'm like, something's going on. I don't know what's going on. I can't make myself get up to go see her. So for me, what would you suggest I do?
Well, it's an interesting example, and thanks for having the courage to share. We even have an adage, right? If you fall off your horse, get right back on.
Yeah, because this is what happens if you don't. It's like, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What happens if you don't is give yourself something truly scary about it, and it reinforces it, and it takes on a life of its own, and it grows out of proportion. This is exactly what we were talking about several times earlier in the evening, that perception kind of selects reality, but it's a distortion. Your horse is no more dangerous now than it ever was, except in your perception. It really is. And the only way you're going to prove that to yourself, that it's no more dangerous, is by getting back on, or we could possibly devise some intermediate steps where maybe you're sitting on a horse that's just standing still as a first trial, or maybe you're just visualizing sitting on a horse, and so forth. You take yourself at your level of readiness, but you face the fear, doing the opposite of your defense, which in this case is to stay away from the horse.
Right.
And I'm wondering, by the way, because as I said earlier, there's one chief defense and one core fear behind every problem. And you said your chief defense was to go to sleep, and I don't think that's the chief defense yet, because the chief defense is the overall umbrella answer to how do you protect yourself from all threat and danger. I think going to sleep is I think it's an example of avoidance, exactly.
Yeah.
So in avoiding getting on the horse, you're demonstrating your chief defense. You want to do the opposite of that by approaching the horse bit by bit as you're ready.
Okay, so what I should do, because I've gotten to the point where I haven't seen her in 6 weeks, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. I need to go see my horse. She's probably wondering what's going on. She's at a very good place, and she has a buddy who she loves, and and they take good care of her. But, as a horse owner, it's kind of irresponsible not to see your horse for 6 weeks. So I've been, kind of beating on myself. So the first thing I should do is do the opposite, which is get up and go see my horse, and then take a buddy and just go sit on my horse. And go from there.
And we know the experience. If you were to sit on your heart would be racing like crazy probably for a little while. And guess what? It would start to calm down bit by bit. In psychology, we have a nice name for it: extinction or habituation or desensitization. And the nerve endings literally can't keep firing that hard and fast and furiously for very long, which brings an experience of and increasing confidence and relaxation. So yeah, that's a very nice example of what we're talking about. Same thing works with the scariest and deep fear, because we're talking about this as a path in life, and guess what? One of our biggest fears is death, right? Mm-hmm. We have to even be willing in our imagination to face our fear of death if we're going to get truly free, because otherwise it's always going to be chasing us. We're always going to be ready to use our defense and try and get control over things, knowing that we can't, that death is inevitable. But when we live through our fear of death in our imagination, for instance, using that alchemist exercise, watching the movie of your fear play out moment by moment, frame by frame, what happens next? Okay, if that happens, what happens next? What happens next? There I am at the moment of death. What happens next? And inevitably, people see, I'm still here. I'm a disembodied consciousness. And many of them find that they have an etheric body, and they start to describe the environment, an etheric environment on the other side of death, and they lose their fear of death. The power of that, it's extraordinary. When you lose your fear of death, what in life can scare you? When you know that we survive it, everything else becomes like, an illusion, right? Anything else that would scare us is seen to be a temporary illusion that we can survive.
Okay, we had some really good questions. I'm going to kind of take you off track here, but it has to do with fear and how it affects society. And there were a couple of of people who ask similar questions. Joseph in the Spreaker chat room asked, what advice would Dr. Pressman have for people living in countries with governments that actively and constantly promote existential fear, like the U.S.? And he says, read A Brave New World.
Yeah. Oh, I know A Brave New World. And Aldous Huxley, by the way, was a very spiritual guy. I'm going to answer from the life story of one of my heroes, Mahatma Gandhi. And he was asked, well, of course, if anybody doesn't know, he overthrew the British government, the most powerful nation on earth at the time, with the power of his nonviolent compassion. So another word for compassion, of course, is love. And he had to be quite masterful over his fear in order to demonstrate that level of compassion. At one point, somebody asked him with Hitler, and Gandhi was silent for a long time, thinking. And finally he said, not without great sacrifice and loss of life, but in the end, nonviolence is the only thing that can work. He even said, if I had to choose between violence and passivity, I would choose violence, because passivity, guess what, is more about fear, the fear of acting. He wanted to make real change. Violence also contains fear. My way of saying it is a forceful way of saying, stop scaring me, right? Stop threatening to take away what I think I need to be safe. And yes, there's a lot of that going on in America today. But in the end, when we as individuals face our own fear and manifest compassion, understanding, freedom from judgment, and the recognition that we are, in fact, one mind, that has reverberations throughout the one mind that are extraordinarily powerful. And we know about the power of prayer, and it's even been documented scientifically. But our experience is we have to first get ourselves free of fear. I have a friend named Tom Carpenter. Some of you may know him. He's absolutely wonderful. He's written a couple of books, and he channels Jesus' voice very clearly and very beautifully. And he says it's our responsibility not to see the world of fear. That doesn't mean that we pretend there's nothing there. It's like we were saying earlier. We have to work with the perception that we have, but not to see it in a fearful way. So actually, he tells a funny story. He was living in Hawaii during the time of Hurricane Iniki, and he and his wife were taking shelter in the basement of their house, but he realized he had forgotten something important, and he had to go upstairs. And as he does, he sees out the window trees flying sideways and rooftops falling off, and this and that. And he heard the voice of Jesus in his mind saying, my goodness, you certainly do have an interesting way of redecorating your illusions. So he's acknowledging that, yes, we are seeing these trees flying and we're redecorating our external reality. But ultimately, fundamentally, we need to know that it's an illusion and not buy into the fear. It's what we were talking about earlier. If you want to help heal someone, you've got to hold on to the perception of love. See the truth and the freedom from fear in them, and hold that truth in yourself as well. I can't quite remember what the question was, but I hope I've answered it.
I think you have. Well, how would we apply that? It's nonviolence, but it's also, he wasn't passive. He was active in his nonviolence. That sitting there, getting a bunch of people together to just sit there in a line, that was activity. That wasn't passivity. But it was nonviolent action. But how would we do this now? So would this be like a 1 million person march on Washington? Would it be a 1 million person march on the media? Because we seem to be bombarded from every direction with these messages of fear. Like, you won't be good enough if your teeth aren't white, and you won't be loved. If you don't take this medicine, you'll die. If this, then this. If the Democrats get back in power, then a bunch of babies will get killed. If the Republicans are in power, then a bunch of women will go to jail for not being submissive to their husbands. Yada yada blah 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 blah. What do we do when our sources are like in our heads all the time with fearful messaging?
Yeah. Well, it's our heads that we have to get straight, and there are a lot of messages in there from outside and from within. But you said correctly, I believe, that Gandhi was very active in his nonviolence, and he actually called it nonviolent non-cooperation, which I just realized for the first time is a perfect translation of the principle we were talking about, doing the opposite of your chief defense, not cooperating with your chief defense. And I think it's important, and I'm so inspired by, the way Gandhi was able to rally millions of people, an entire nation, to be that free of fear that they would tolerate physical beatings and tramplings by horses and imprisonment by the thousands, all in the interest of a higher cause. Their cause was the liberation of India. We're talking about liberation from fear and from the human condition and the wheel of death and rebirth. Same thing. So my answer to your question is, first we have to get free of our own fear and really centered in our cause. Then, like we were saying earlier, we don't make decisions before we're free of fear because we can't see objectively. Fear always distorts our perception about the right action to take. Only when we're totally willing to go in this direction and totally willing to go in the opposite direction are we free of any secret investment dictated by fear. Then we can see what's objectively going to be most helpful. So I don't have a single answer. It's for each of us to decide individually. But the answer comes when we free ourselves from fear and we can look objectively at the situation.
Okay. I'm just thinking that we should have a hug a lefty, hug a righty day where a bunch of people get together and say, you know what, we really should just hug it out and, not be afraid of each other. Refuse to listen. We're refusing to listen to all this messaging about what I'm being told about you and what you're being told about me. We're not going to listen. And let's just hug it out. And then if somebody tells us something negative, we're not going to listen to that either. Okay, so going on. I just have a comment from Dale. If I accidentally used your last name, my dear, you should change your name in the chat room so that if you are going to post a question and we want to give you credit for posting the question, you're not yelling at us later because we have asked your question for you. So change your name in the chat room, my dear, and then you will avoid the problem altogether. Thank you. Okay, let's see. Moving on. That's my 2 cents on that one. And I mean that very respectfully, but that's the best way to avoid the problem. Hold on. Anybody else have a question? Nope. Okay, yes. The guy says, have you found your rationale of reality is like a feng shui of the mind, an ebb and flow of consciousness? And have you found these understandings have helped you in forgiveness at realization? It's interesting wording.
Sorry, Elizabeth, it got a little staticky at one point. Would you mind repeating that?
The guy asks, have you found your rationale of reality is like a feng shui of mind and ebb and flow of consciousness? Have you found these understandings have helped you in forgiveness at realization?
Well, I have to say, the guy is quite the beautiful poet. I think he's asking me personally, have I found that this model I'm describing and these principles of releasing fear, have they helped me personally with forgiveness, and do they create a pleasing feng shui of the mind? I love that phrase. Yeah, the answer is yes, in a big way, all capital letters with exclamation points. This is my path. This is my life's work, and it's what I do with clients in my psychotherapy practice and when I speak and give workshops as well. I am extremely, what should I say, enamored of, I hope that doesn't sound funny, these practices, because they are so helpful for getting at the very root of fear and digging it up, transforming it, dissolving it, showing it to be an illusion. And as I've said, for me, my understanding is fear is the source of all human suffering. So I've been looking my entire life for how to make my contribution to improving the planet, and this is it. This is everything that I believe is important, because it's not just about working with one problem. It's at the root of all problems. You can apply these techniques to any situation, to any circumstance, to any problem, and ultimately to the quote spiritual problem, the one called wanting to find freedom from this human condition and remember our true place with God. So feng shui of the mind, absolutely. That's what it's doing for me, and I love that phrase.
Great. Joseph has a comment for me. He says the largest, most important question the Western world faces is, what do we accept as quote-unquote our natural culture, and how much of that culture is just BS that we are fed? And this really speaks to fear and separation, doesn't it? I mean, if you look at somebody who's from another culture, aren't we just sort of naturally afraid because we don't understand the culture? Or, what is this divide about when we have cultures coming into countries and mixing? The melting pot fear, or the anti-melting pot fear, is what he's speaking of. I mean, I don't have an answer for this. What is a natural culture? I would think that a culture is always changing over time as people meet and mix and change and grow. What do you think?
I'm afraid it got a little broken up there at the end, but I'm pretty sure I understand the essence of the question. And I want to underline and agree emphatically with what you said, Elizabeth, that it is another example of separation and fear. So fear, we buy into a core fear as children. We never let it go because we're constantly defending it and therefore rehearsing it and therefore making it real throughout our lives until we do this work. That kind of fear has us wanting to defend or control the outside world, control other people, even control our minds, because remember, there's the problem of trying too hard sometimes to get free of fear. And it keeps us from what the Taoists would call, the way, being natural and flowing and just taking our place in the order of things without trying to control it so much. So relationships are the most significant aspect of how we try to control and manage and manipulate our world to get what we want. And it always backfires on us because the other person in the relationship or the other people are trying to control and manipulate us because of their fears as well. It's only when we have the courage to say, let me be the one. Let me be the one first to, as I'll use a quote from a friend of mine, to cut the net of agreement, to break this age-old cycle of attack and defense and attack, and let me be the one to offer compassion and understanding, to let go of my own fear with another person, to see that they're calling out for love when they're in fear or when they're attacking me, and to answer that call for love with love. And then guess what happens? They're healed, they're released from their fear because of our generosity of spirit, and that releases us from our fear because they respond in kind. They respond with love as well.
Unless they have another problem. I did that recently to someone, and I was seriously attacked. So I went, okay.
That doesn't mean that it hasn't made a difference. It means that you're in a process now where you, according to your level of readiness, have to respond to their attack with another instance of understanding their attack is fear. It comes from fear. I came up with the line decades ago that has just been so meaningful for me, and that is, anything is forgivable once you understand it. And the understanding is that the person who attacks is afraid. And if we meet, yes, we have to protect ourselves, of course. We're not going to be foolish about it. But there are lots of different ways to offer love. It doesn't have to be verbal or it doesn't have to be physical. It's an internal experience. And really, offering love is just another way of saying letting go of our own fearful, defensive response. So you can protect yourself physically in all kinds of ways and do what you have to do to protect the body and nurture ourselves and so forth. But if we're holding that spirit of nonviolent, non-cooperation, of love and understanding, that will, in the end, change that person. It might not be in a form that you can see. It might not be at a time that you're expecting, but it's inevitable in the end because we're manifesting our reality, our entire perception reality, according to either the choice for fear or the choice for love. That's what we're going to see.
Okay. And so Catalina has a follow-up question to what we've been talking about. I think this is a follow-up question, but she wrote it before we said this. The best way to forgive someone that doesn't change bad behavior.
So sorry. It's a funny connection. Some words got covered in each other. Yeah.
She says, what is the best way to forgive someone that doesn't change their bad behavior?
Oh, I see. That doesn't change their bad behavior. Yeah. I think it's a wise question because it's speaking, if I'm understanding it correctly, to that same point. You can't change someone else's behavior and truly practice forgiveness because you're actually doing war on them. If you're saying, I will change you, you're coming from your own fearful need to get them to be the way you want. And they're going to pick that up, and they're not going to like it, and they're going to respond in kind. Instead, to say, let me practice letting go of my own fear. Let me be in love first. And sometimes that means going through the exercises, for instance, that we described earlier. Facing your fear bit by bit, going through it till you come out the other side, no matter what that takes, and discovering that you are safe enough and free enough of your fear that you can tolerate what they want to dish out to you. And the moment you do that, they're going to pick up that you're not the threat they thought you were, and you're not even going to see them as having bad behavior because you're not having a distorted perception. Maybe you'll see their call for love. Maybe you'll see something that requires a response of, stopping them or altering their behavior so that they're not hurting you or hurting them. But the essence of what they receive from you is love and compassion.
Very good answer. And then Joseph asked, as part of a statement, could Jesus be the Western archetype of the fearless, loving being?
Well, I think he certainly was and is, absolutely. I'm pretty sure this is okay to say to your audience, but if people don't already know, A Course in Miracles was channeled, and there's a wonderful story about it, but the voice that's speaking in A Course in Miracles is clearly stating that he is Jesus, the historical person that lived in that body but is now, not bound to a body. So, yeah, I think he's still very much around and present and one of the great teachers, and I think he got it right.
Awesome. That is
Hi there, this
wonderful.
Is Dave Scott from Spaced Out Radio, and I want you to come on a nightly journey.
I'm sorry,
starting
folks.
At 9
Hold
p.m.
on a
Pacific,
sec.
Midnight Eastern, every Monday through Friday.
We're almost to the end, and I was going to play a little light music in the background, and I got Dave Scott instead. Thank you so much for coming on with us tonight. If people want to contact you, how do they do so?
I guess my website is the easiest way, www.toddpressman.com. And again, I'm happy to share that ebook of quotes and stories that can change your life. It's really fun and some great teaching stories in there. So you can sign up for the newsletter on the website, and I'll send you that, and you can learn about other events, seminars, speaking engagements, and so forth if you'd like as well.
I may be contacting you for a little fear therapy, since I've got my avoidance thing pretty well down at this point, with my horse situation, which is greatly impacting my life because I used to love to ride, and I love my horse. So also, just so you know, Todd Pressman has some wonderful books on Amazon.com. You have the book Radical Joy, and then the Bicycle Repair Shop. Is that the one about multiple personality disorder?
Yes. Radical Joy is available on Amazon. Bicycle Repair Shop is on lulu.com, Lulu.com. And yeah, it's a true story of work I did, just of the nature we were describing, moving through fear with a woman who had 72 personalities, and she integrated them all into one, her true self, and kept, interestingly, a separate, quote, personality, which wasn't really an altered personality. It was a spirit guide. And now she does teaching sessions, spiritual healing sessions with her spirit guides. Very beautiful.
Thank you so much. Thank you for telling us about that. Thank you for being here on Spaced Out Radio, Dr. Pressman. Have a good night, everybody. We'll see you next week.